thank you. And thank you to the Chronicle for having us, because this is one of those races that's so far down the ballot that most folks are not aware of what it does. But let me tell you a little bit about it, and a little bit about me for those of you who don't know. My husband Dan and I are raising our 3 kiddos in the path of the Yakima burn, which stood for over a century as the largest forest fire in Washington state history. But in just this last decade, that horrible record has already been surpassed 3 times. Too many of our forests are undermanaged or outright neglected, and they have turned into crowded, diseased tinderboxes, just waiting for a spark. Fires run rampant every summer now. They ruin our days with smoke, emitting tons of carbon into the air, and they are making it more expensive to live here. They're driving up the cost of home insurance, making housing in this state even more of a challenge. And if you're unfortunate enough to live in the path of one of those devastating blazes, it can cause unimaginable heartache. So I've decided I'm not going to leave my kids or your kids a legacy of burning forests and choking smoke. This office was created, essentially the position or the need for it was created at statehood, when the federal government gave to each county a specific piece of land, and they said, this land is to be used in perpetuity for the benefit of schools or community services. Meaning it was to be managed in an ongoing and sustainable basis. Well, over time, different counties gave that land back to the state because they didn't want to manage, or maybe they didn't understand how to manage it, and eventually this office was formed. This commissioner is an executive position. It is not legislative. It manages 2,000 employees across the state, across 6 regional offices, 3 aquatics offices. It manages tideland, timberland, dryland, aquaculture up and down the coast. It also manages commercial land. The Issaquah Costco is on DNR land. The waterfront in Seattle is on DNR leased land. Most folks don't realize it. And the purpose of this role is, sorry, I went black, but okay, there we go, came back up. The purpose of this role is to be a fiduciary, to responsibly steward it and manage it for the benefit of the people of Washington, and in particular, according to the courts, for the Common School Fund, for public schools, for construction of those schools. So my opponent, we've been all over the state now, meeting with folks, and my opponent is, on day 1, has said he's going to set aside more of that land to not be touched. Half of the land in Western Washington in the trust is already set aside for conservation, for habitat, for other things, right? Not to be touched. Less than half of it is still available to be harvested and that money returned to counties and to schools, and to keep the forest healthy, because we know that by stewarding it, we're going to keep it from burning or becoming diseased or impacted. He wants to set it aside. I don't, and I'm hopeful to take some questions about the future, or our view for the future of our resources here in Washington State.
Thank you, and that is time. All right. We have 2 roving mics. If there are questions from the audience, please raise your hand and someone will come and give you a chance to ask that.
You said that you're for, what is your energy policy? You say you want to use Washington's resources. What is your policy for the energy?
So, I can give you a general perspective when it comes to energy, but this role, this commissioner role, is supposed to manage our state lands for the benefit of the trust. So it's not necessarily energy, that's not the energy regulator or the energy manager, right? But there are opportunities. You know, I've always believed in an all-of-the-above energy approach. Let's use innovation and competition to get to the best energy sources as we move forward, right? But I strongly believe that we shouldn't hamstring our economy by jumping ahead of innovation and having the government mandate what the best types of energy are. Because if we did that, I mean, think about a cell phone. Had the government mandated the type of cell phones we were going to use back in the 80s, we'd still be walking with giant bricks. But because of innovation and competition, those technologies are evolving. And I think the same general principle should apply to energy. You know, I believe, I was just in the Tri-Cities last night, and the folks in the Columbia Basin have over time made major sacrifices so that we all have a carbonless renewable energy source out of the Columbia River, Snake River Dam system. 70% of the energy in Seattle is powered by that dam system, and to replace it would take 16 coal-fired plants. I simply believe we shouldn't just hamstring ourselves in the process of moving forward. We should do it in a smart way. And a great example, my opponent takes a lot of credit for being part of shutting down the coal plant here. He brags about it to his activist friends. And he said, I shut it down and we took care of the workers. I beg to differ. I've worked with this community and I've seen the devastation, the impact when that mill closed and we lost those 400 jobs. There's a lot of promises that I keep hearing about. If we set aside the land and we don't harvest it, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. We'll find other land to harvest. But there's no one, he's not pointing out how we're going to move forward and actually utilize the resource.
2 minutes.
Thank you. And this isn't on, okay.
We have one more question back here.
So I'm glad you're here. I'm Bob Gunther, and I've worked with organized labor for many, many years. And I know about the shutdown of that power plant. I know what took place in 2011, and your opponent cannot take credit for that. So I just want you to know that. The thing that I wanted to ask you was, I've served on the Pinchot Partners for many years with the Gifford Pinchot National Forest for 20 years. And we have developed a collaborative system where we have, with the Department of Natural Resources, a good neighbor authority. Would you be willing to sustain that?
I absolutely. I believe in the good neighbor authority, which is why I helped put that legislation together, which it allows the state to operate on federal land and in federal areas to do cleanup work that maybe the feds haven't done, because I'm sure you understand the need on the federal forest. And to your other point, I think it's important to recognize this actually is not, it is a partisan race officially, but it's really not. Because if a tree burns and a forest goes poof, and we neither have the environmental benefit or the economic benefit, it impacts everyone. Trees are neither Republican or Democrat, which is one of the reasons I'm very pleased to announce I did receive the endorsement from the American Pulp and Paper Workers from Washington State and from the United Allied Trades, painters and trade workers. So this is something that people are recognizing that this isn't a partisan issue, this is an economics issue, it is also environmental. If we steward it well, we'll pass it on to the next generation. But if we walk away from it and set it aside, it is burning. And on the federal side, sorry, I'm flying without a timer. But I'll make this point. On the federal side, the federal forests have been under a policy of set aside and walk away. And there are collaboratives who are doing yeoman's work to get them restored. But in California, I'll use California example, they set aside habitat and walked away from it, stopped doing any kind of thinning or commercial harvest or sustainable harvest. And it has burned. In 2020, the fires in that 1 year of the fires in California undid 20 years worth of carbon reduction efforts in that state. 20 years in one fire season. In addition, 75% of the owl habitat that was set aside has burned. If we don't sustainably manage our forests and use those Washington wood products here for Washington jobs, we're going to see similar things happen in our forests. So rather than input our wood from other countries and export our guilt, we should be using Washington-grown wood in a sustainable way because it sequesters carbon and it brings about economic opportunity. And that's part of my vision for this office, should I get elected.
We have time for one more question, if there's one more.
One in the back, there's...
Would you like me to do a wave at 30 seconds? Sorry, that's not.
Jamie, with all due respect for what you're doing now, I'm still struggling with when you were in Congress representing us and you voted to impeach Trump. Yes. Could you please address that?
Well, I'm happy to, but it's just something that...
I'll step in here. We're asking that the questions be addressed to the office that's in place. So that's not a question for your office anyway.
I will say, I have made statements on it. I have said a lot about it. If you have read through those or watched those, and you still have questions, I'm happy to address them. Thank you. Is there any other question about timber, forestry? This gentleman in the back, we're going to end on that one.
Thank you. What, if any, interaction do you have with the Department of Fish and Wildlife?
I have not jurisdiction over Fish and Wildlife, but I do think so Fish and Wildlife is appointed by the governor, and they have made a lot of, we'll say it nicely, questionable determinations. This is not Fish and Wildlife. This is about 6 million acres of public lands, and it is under the federal habitat conservation plan, so we do work with other agencies, but we have specific rules we have to meet. The benefit of this, though, is by law, according to the Supreme Court and the state Supreme Court, we have to manage it and get something out of it. It is not a giant parks department. It is not a giant, and though there is also recreational access on DNR land, and I'm very much pro that, it is not a parks department, it's not a conservation department, though I think it is actively managing is going to provide the best conservation. It is purely to make sure that our forests, our rangelands, our tidelands, and our aquaculture lands are utilized, but also passed on to the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.